April 1945. The war in Europe is over. Inside a vast industrial complex in Detroit, the air smells of oil, hot steel, and burnt rubber. Conveyors thunder like a heartbeat. Sparks leap from welders' torches. Hundreds of men move in rhythm, sleeves rolled, hands blackened, faces set in silent focus. Parked in neat rows under hanging lamps stand hundreds of olive-green vehicles. Willys MB Jeeps. Every 30 seconds, another rolls off the line. In one corner, a group of visiting German engineers watches in stunned disbelief. These were men who once designed Panzer tanks, Messerschmitt engines, and V-2 rockets. Yet here, before them, a different kind of genius unfolds. Not in precision, but in volume. The German delegation says almost nothing. Only one of them mutters quietly, "Das ist unmöglich." But it wasn't. It was the American Jeep factory, the engine of victory. By the time America entered World War II in December 1941, the industrial landscape of the nation was about to transform into something the world had never seen. Factories that once built cars, tractors, and washing machines were converted almost overnight into war plants. Assembly lines that had been designed for comfort and luxury now produced steel, armor, and machines of survival. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration called it the arsenal of democracy. The phrase was more than propaganda. It became a living reality. Within a single year, the United States was producing tanks, planes, rifles, and trucks on a scale that dwarfed entire continents. At the center of this transformation was a vehicle, no bigger than a family car. The Jeep, originally developed in 1940 through a crash program between the U.S. Army and a handful of small manufacturers. The Willys MB became the most iconic symbol of American ingenuity during the war. It was simple, it was rugged, and it could be mass-produced with extraordinary efficiency. Across the Atlantic, German engineers had spent years perfecting machines of precision, tanks with intricate gearboxes, aircraft with advanced aerodynamics, engines machined to microscopic tolerances. Their craftsmanship was world-class, but it came with a price: complexity. While German factories built hundreds, America built tens of thousands. For every Tiger tank that rolled out of a German plant, dozens of Shermans, trucks, and Jeeps thundered from American assembly lines, ready for shipment across the globe. To the Germans, the Jeep seemed crude. To the Americans, it was beautiful in its simplicity. A tool that could be repaired anywhere, by anyone, under any condition. By 1943, over 500,000 Jeeps had been built. Soldiers joked that the only thing the Jeep couldn't do was fly. In reality, it came close. It was dropped by parachute, carried on gliders, and ferried through jungles, deserts, and frozen battlefields. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a symbol of how America fought its war, with speed, standardization, and unstoppable production. In Nazi Germany, production worked under a different philosophy, one built on precision, hierarchy, and craftsmanship. Every machine was an achievement of engineering perfection, but perfection took time. Factories like Krupp, Henschel, and Porsche operated with meticulous attention to detail. The Tiger and Panther tanks, for instance, were engineering marvels, powerful, heavily armored, and technically advanced. But they were also slow to build and prone to breakdowns under real battlefield conditions. Each tank required thousands of man-hours, rare metals, and delicate machining. If a single component failed, the entire vehicle could be rendered useless until replaced, something nearly impossible in the chaos of war. Meanwhile, across the ocean, American industry had adopted a very different philosophy. Where Germany built art, the United States built function. The Jeep was a perfect embodiment of that idea. It was made up of standardized parts, stamped steel, and simple mechanics. Bolts, axles, and engines were designed to be interchangeable, a revolutionary idea at the time. Factories in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania operated around the clock. Assembly lines didn't wait for perfection. They demanded consistency. If one part failed, another could replace it instantly. By 1944, The scale had become almost incomprehensible. Detroit alone produced more military vehicles than all of Germany combined. Conveyor belts rolled endlessly. Welding sparks lit up the night, and engines thundered through testing bays like an industrial symphony. Every 8 minutes, a new Jeep left the production line. Each was tested, fueled, and driven straight to the docks, ready for transport to Europe or the Pacific. This was the miracle of American mass production. A system built not on luxury, but on purpose. A system that could turn raw steel into war machines faster than anyone could destroy them. When German engineers were finally brought to America after the war, men who had designed V-2, rockets, and Panther tanks, they stood inside these massive factories and fell silent, because in that moment, they realized that America hadn't just won the war with weapons. It had won with production. Behind every Jeep that rolled off the line stood an army of ordinary men and women. By 1942, more than 6 million Americans worked in war industries, and nearly 1/3 of them were women. They came from every background imaginable: farmers' sons, small-town mechanics, immigrant laborers, housewives. Many had never set foot in a factory before the war, yet within weeks they were riveting, welding and assembling vehicles that would define the Allied advance. Posters urged them on with words like "Duty healed," "The job he left behind," and "Speed means victory." 30. Clatter of tools became the rhythm of wartime America. Night shifts blurred into dawn, and production quotas rose higher each month. In towns like Toledo, where the Willys Overland plant operated, entire communities became part of the war effort. Cafes opened before sunrise for the factory workers. Train whistles signaled not departure, but another batch of steel arriving to be transformed. Each Jeep that left the factory carried a sense of pride. Workers signed their names on the underside of dashboards, knowing those machines would soon cross oceans and battlefields. They weren't just building vehicles, they were building hope. The genius of the Jeep wasn't found in complexity. It was found in what it didn't need. Engineers at Willys understood a brutal truth of war. Anything that couldn't be repaired quickly was already lost. The Jeep's 4-cylinder engine could be stripped, cleaned, and reassembled in the field using only basic tools. Its flat fenders doubled as seats or workbenches. The windshield folded down for transport. The body panels could be replaced with a wrench and a few bolts. Every aspect was designed for the battlefield, not the blueprint room. Even the tires, thick, treaded, and identical on all sides, could handle mud, snow, or jungle terrain without change. The Jeep could climb 45-degree slopes, cross rivers, and pull artillery pieces through swampy ground. To the Germans, such simplicity bordered on crude. To the Americans, it was the ultimate expression of practicality. It didn't matter if it was beautiful. It mattered that it worked, and it worked everywhere. To the German engineers, the true shock was not the Jeep itself. It was how fast America could build it. At the peak of wartime production, Willys Overland and Ford were producing nearly 650 Jeeps per day. Assembly lines ran 24 hours, 7 days a week. Factories operated under a precision that mirrored military discipline. When one bolt was delayed, entire logistics chains reacted instantly to correct it. By the end of the war, over 640,000 Jeeps had been built, more than the total number of tanks, armored cars, and half-tracks Germany produced combined. Each Jeep required around 3,400 parts. And yet, thanks to standardized manufacturing, every single piece could fit any Jeep made in any factory. A replacement part made in Michigan could repair a Jeep built in Ohio, or one shipped to the deserts of North Africa. Tattumorins. German visitors who once prided themselves on engineering. Perfection suddenly understood something devastating. Their precision was powerless against this scale. America had turned industry into an army. Beyond its utility, the Jeep became a symbol, a rolling testament to a new kind of warfare and a new kind of nation. To the soldiers who drove it, the Jeep meant freedom of movement. It could traverse bombed villages, muddy fields, jungles, or icy mountain roads. Commanders used it as a mobile office. Medics used it to carry the wounded. Generals used it to tour liberated cities. Photographs from every front, Normandy, Sicily, the Philippines, showed the same silhouette. That small, boxy frame with its 7-slot grille. It was instantly recognizable, unpretentious, and utterly reliable. Unlike the German Tiger or the British Spitfire, the Jeep wasn't designed to inspire awe. It was designed to serve everyone. That simplicity gave it a democratic character. A machine for the many, not the elite few. Even Eisenhower himself once said, "The Jeep, the Dakota, and the landing craft were the 3 tools that won the war." And when the war ended, the Jeep didn't retire. It went home to farms, forests, and fields, carrying the same spirit of resilience that had carried it through war. In the autumn of 1945, months after Germany's surrender, a select group of German engineers was escorted through America's industrial heartland. A quiet, controlled tour arranged by the Allied occupation authorities. They had seen the ruins of their own factories, steel skeletons twisted by bombs, machinery reduced to rubble. Now, in Detroit, they walked through something entirely different, a world of noise, light, and endless motion. At the Willys Overland plant in Toledo, they watched the assembly line roll forward in perfect synchronization. Chassis frames slid on conveyors. Engines were lowered by mechanical cranes. Workers in denim uniforms moved like clockwork, each motion practiced, precise, and relentless. Every 49 seconds, a new Jeep came to life. A young American foreman shouted instructions over the noise. Workers adjusted torque wrenches, bolted axles, checked wiring, and then waved another finished vehicle off the line. One of the German engineers, a man who had once worked on Panzer IV transmission systems, pulled a stopwatch from his pocket. He timed the process twice, frowned, and then turned to his interpreter. He said nothing at first, then quietly muttered, "Unsere Ingenieure würden das nie glauben." Our engineers would never believe this. The Americans hadn't built a factory. They had built a system. It wasn't about perfection. It was about momentum. In Germany, production had been chained by hierarchy and precision. Each machine hand-finished, each part individually tuned. But in America, every factory was a living organism, adaptable, modular, and fast. When one plant couldn't keep up, another took over. When steel ran short, another supplier filled the gap. The system never stopped. The German engineers had once believed technology would win wars. But standing in the Jeep plant, they realized something greater had decided the outcome: industrial democracy. A nation where every worker, every assembly line, and every mechanic became a soldier of production. That realization, quiet, devastating, undeniable, was the moment they understood why Germany had lost. For the Germans, the shock deepened as they visited other plants: Ford's River Rouge complex, General Motors in Flint, and Chrysler's tank arsenal in Warren. They saw assembly lines where car factories had been converted overnight to build bombers, tanks, and trucks. They saw the same discipline that had once gone into building sedans now redirected to war machines. Streamlined, efficient, unstoppable. At River Rouge, molten steel poured like liquid fire through channels the size of rivers. Sparks cascaded from smelters, lighting up the faces of workers who moved with mechanical precision. On the far end of the complex, raw ore entered through one gate, and finished vehicles exited from another. From dirt to delivery, all under one roof. To the German visitors, it felt less like a factory and more like a war engine that never slept. In Germany, production had been compartmentalized. Tank factories in Kassel, aircraft in Augsburg, engines in Stuttgart. Each relied on narrow supply chains that were easily severed by bombing. But in America, redundancy had been built into the system. Multiple plants could produce the same part, ensuring no single strike could halt production. Even when entire cities were hit by strikes, blizzards, or shortages, production barely slowed. America's strength lay not in individual genius, but in collective synchronization. By the time the Germans left Detroit, silence hung over the group. One engineer, formerly with Daimler-Benz, recorded in his notes, "The American factory is not superior in machinery. It is superior in organization. Their workers are trained not to innovate, but to maintain movement. They build not art, but victory." He wasn't wrong. The Willys MB Jeep, with its stubby frame and growling engine, had become the physical embodiment of that philosophy. Every turn of a wrench, every weld, every shipment of steel represented the invisible front lines of American industrial warfare. When Eisenhower toured the factories after the war, he reportedly said that standing inside them was like watching the heart of victory beat. And as the last Jeep rolled off the line, bound for post-war Europe, even the German engineers could not help but admire it. For in its humble simplicity, in that box of bolts and steel, they had witnessed the true weapon that had defeated them. When the war ended, the Jeep didn't fade into history. It became part of it. From Berlin to Burma, soldiers kept their Jeeps running long after the fighting stopped. They were used to transport prisoners, deliver mail, haul supplies, and even plow fields in war-torn villages. For many civilians, the first vehicle they saw after years of occupation bore the white star of the U.S. Army on its hood. The Jeep symbolized not destruction, but reconstruction. In Japan, Jeeps carried food and medical supplies during the occupation. In France, farmers used them to rebuild roads and pull carts. In Italy, children painted American flags on the fenders as tokens of hope. Even General Charles de Gaulle, once critical of American dominance, called it the chariot of liberation. By 1946, surplus Jeeps flooded civilian markets. Farmers, forest rangers, and explorers bought them by the thousands. Willys rebranded the design as the CJ, the civilian Jeep, advertising it as the all-around farm workhorse. The same vehicle that had conquered deserts and mountains now hauled lumber and milk across the American countryside. But beyond the utility, the Jeep carried something more enduring, a memory of cooperation between soldier and citizen, worker and warrior. It wasn't built in a palace or designed by a single genius. It was born in a garage, perfected on a battlefield, and immortalized in peace. The German engineers who once stared in disbelief would later admit, quietly, sometimes bitterly, that the war had not been lost in the skies or on the ground, but in the factories, and the Jeep was its most undeniable proof. As the world rebuilt, the lessons of the Jeep spread far beyond Detroit. In Germany, British and American occupation authorities dismantled Nazi industry, but they also studied it. They wanted to understand how to rebuild without repeating the mistakes that had led to war. Ironically, it was the American model, flexible, decentralized, and fast-moving, that shaped the reconstruction of Europe. Under the Marshall Plan, American factories shipped machinery, raw materials, and technical expertise across the Atlantic. Former German engineers, once rivals, began collaborating with U.S. manufacturers. The Jeep, which they had once dismissed as crude, became a model for post-war European utility vehicles, inspiring designs like the Land Rover, Volkswagen Kübelwagen derivatives, and early Mercedes-Benz G-Series prototypes. Meanwhile, in the United States, the wartime production miracle transformed the nation into the world's industrial leader. The same factories that built Jeeps began producing peacetime goods, tractors, washing machines, and automobiles that symbolized prosperity. Yet veterans never forgot the machine that had carried them through hell and back. From the beaches of Normandy to the mountains of Italy, every soldier had a Jeep story of escaping artillery, rescuing comrades, or simply finding shelter in the rain under its canvas roof. It was more than a vehicle. It was a companion. In museums today, rusted Willys MBs sit behind ropes and glass, their metal dented, their paint chipped by decades of service. But for those who understand what they represent, they are not relics. They are reminders of endurance, simplicity, and unity of purpose. The Jeep had done more than move armies. It had moved the world. As the world rebuilt, the lessons of the Jeep spread far beyond Detroit. In Germany, British and American occupation authorities dismantled Nazi industry, but they also studied it. They wanted to understand how to rebuild without repeating the mistakes that had led to war. Ironically, it was the American model, flexible, decentralized, and fast-moving, that shaped the reconstruction of Europe. Under the Marshall Plan, American factories shipped machinery, raw materials, and technical expertise across the Atlantic. Former German engineers, once rivals, began collaborating with U.S. manufacturers. The Jeep, which they had once dismissed as crude, became a model for post-war European utility vehicles, inspiring designs like the Land Rover, Volkswagen Kübelwagen derivatives, and early Mercedes-Benz G-Series prototypes. Meanwhile, in the United States, the wartime production miracle transformed the nation into the world's industrial leader. The same factories that built Jeeps began producing peacetime goods, tractors, washing machines, and automobiles that symbolized prosperity. Yet veterans never forgot the machine that had carried them through hell and back. From the beaches of Normandy to the mountains of Italy, every soldier had a Jeep story of escaping artillery, rescuing comrades, or simply finding shelter in the rain under its canvas roof. It was more than a vehicle. It was a companion. In museums today, rusted Willys MBs sit behind ropes and glass, their metal dented, their paint chipped by decades of service. But for those who understand what they represent, they are not relics. They are reminders of endurance, simplicity, and unity of purpose. The Jeep had done more than move armies. It had moved the world. War has a way of revealing what truly defines strength. For the Germans, it had been precision, machines engineered to perfection, polished and exact. For the Americans, it was something far humbler, the power to build together. The Jeep was not the fastest, nor the strongest, nor the most beautiful machine of the war. Yet it became one of its most enduring symbols, because it represented what happens when a nation unites behind a single purpose. It carried generals and privates, wounded soldiers and freed prisoners, journalists and engineers. It crossed every terrain and every border, leaving behind the same imprint, 2 tire tracks, and the quiet proof that mass cooperation could defeat tyranny. When those German engineers stood in silence at the Jeep factory, they weren't only seeing machines roll off a line. They were witnessing the birth of a new kind of power, industrial democracy, where every wrench turn was an act of freedom, and every worker a soldier of production. The Jeep was America's handshake to the 20th century. Simple, unbreakable, unstoppable. A small box of steel and willpower that proved one truth above all. You don't win wars with weapons alone. You win them with people.